My name is Martin Ohl. Unfortunately, my language skills are not that good that I can speak in the natural language here. So appreciate the opportunity to be here today and present in front of you, basically. So my name is Martin Ohl, Solution Architect in EMEA. Work for McAfee more than 6 years right now. And what we've done over the years, we worked pretty extensively with government cert institutes, government agencies together, especially finance institutes, to maximize their capabilities in security operations. So as my previous speaker talked about raising attacks, more bot network detections, all these kind of things tells me that I need to get better in prevention, but also detection and response. So during my presentation, I will highlight some of the reference architecture designs, what we've done with customers, pretty operational, and also give you some understanding of all the different components that we need for future-proofing SOC and align this to industry models. So in the first instance, if you look at a security operations center and us as McAfee, we are kind of a device to cloud cybersecurity company. We pretty heavily focus on security operations. So one, talking about the management, threat intelligence, analytics, and workflow automation. So this means that all the different components for security operations teams. But I think in the past, there's a huge misunderstanding in the industry. Security operations is not just technology driven. You need to find the right balance between people, process, and technologies. That is the right balance for a security operations team. And SecOps plays a role in every single key outcome you want to achieve and in your IT security strategy. So to give you an idea, leveraging threat intelligence or getting better in neutralizing emerging threats, SecOps plays a role in that. If you want to define your data strategy, SecOps plays a role in that. If you want to be compliant against GDPR or look for the NIST directive, SecOps plays a role in that. SecOps is such a critical component today that you need to look at, that we need to get better in detection and response. So what are the main objectives in a security operations center? So if you look at security operation itself, you talk about most of the time the incident response process. And most of the time you look to measure your success in IT security operation by first measuring the way, how long does it take you to respond to an incident. But you can maximize that. One, taking information of taking the MTTR, so the mean time to respond and the mean time to detect. What this does, first it defines the ability, how fast are you able to identify a problem in security operations. So how you do that? First, leveraging the right telemetry data. So I'm collecting the right data, leveraging intelligence and analytics to identify that I have a problem in security operations, or I have right now an incident. But also taking the information to start investigating. So you might heard about triage, scoping, and understanding and validate the importance of the intelligence that we received aligned to security operations. But also updating defenses. If you measure your success, you know pretty well how you operate in these phases. What is interesting, this is most of the time talking about security effectiveness. So if you look at efficiencies, to be honest, we need to get better in taking information, intelligence feeds, but also reducing the amount and the complexity of the tools that we have in the IT department. If you count how many tools do you have today in IT security, if you are above 100, I think that's the average. So we should reduce the complexity and maximize the capacity of our people. But also look at what are the different tools and components that we can use for workflow and automation, and what are the steps that we can automate in a way to maximize our speed, our capacity, and the accuracy of the data that we produce in security operations. So let's look at the main objectives or the main kind of industry models that are out there. And you might have heard about a couple of them called, from Gartner defines it as a SOAR platform architecture. If you look at ESG Group, it defines it as a SOPA architecture. To be honest, SOPA is way more advanced than SOAR. Why? Because it defines what are all the different capabilities you need to have in an IT security operations to have a future-proofing SOC. And this starts at the bottom, leveraging the right telemetry data. Do we have the right data? Do we collect the right data? Do we have the first common distributed data service that consume that data? And this is basically the first industry model that highlights a common distributed data bus that consumes data and pushes data up into software services and into my analytics place, where I most of the time work as security operations. SOAR is what you see at the top, automation and the orchestration layer. But all of these combined capabilities we need to have in security operations for a future-proven SOC. So now is the biggest question, how do we align to that? So what are all the different layers and capabilities we need to have today? And this chart presents it pretty well. If you look at the bottom, you see that we need to define the right sensoring capabilities. So we collect the right data from our malware sensors, our network sensors, leveraging intelligence sensors that push this information into a service integration layer. And here I want to highlight one important point is this one, our OpenDXL framework. What we've done over the past is we heavily invested into a messaging fabric, an architecture, how every technology is able to communicate to each other. So over the years, the idea was, okay, we have a lot of McAfee components in the market, but no one is able to communicate to each other. So the first goal was for us, are we able to integrate every single McAfee component, and is every single McAfee component able to communicate to each other over a unified communication fabric? So this is what we've done. It was really the first challenge and the first goal that we had. But second, what we've done and decided in the last couple of years, we completely open sourced our data exchange layer fabric, which is nothing else as a communication fabric to communicate to every single McAfee component, but also to every other vendor in the market that is out there. So I don't need to highlight all the integration that we have with Checkpoint, Fortinet, Forcepoint, etc. It doesn't matter in the case of leveraging that in the context of security operations. Today in my talk track, I will focus on the top two layers, leveraging threat intelligence platforms, getting better in leveraging threat intelligence, and also leveraging workflow automation tools to automate some of the key tasks in security operations. So let's look into some intelligence solution designs. And to be honest, when we work with government institutes and government certs together, most of the time the question is, we want to get better in leveraging threat intelligence in my daily life. So that has raised over the years. But the question is, what is the process in leveraging threat intelligence? And most of the time, we focus on these areas. So we collect, aggregate, validate threat intelligence. And to be honest, the most hardest piece in IT security industry is to validate threat intelligence. Why? Because you have to prove the accuracy of your own tools, the accuracy of the intelligence feed that you receive, and you need to enrich that data. It's the most complex scenario in security operations. So what? We collected now an aggregated threat intelligence, but so what should we do with that? We should consume this intelligence in security operations to improve really my detection in investigation in security operations. So the first key tasks. But also looking into how can we update our key cyber defense countermeasure tools to update, for example, my firewalls, my IPS systems, web proxy systems, to make sure that this information that we received, for example, from a government, is automatically protecting me on the other side. So to give you some high-level context and reference architecture design. So we build a lot of integrations with an intelligence platform called MISP, the Malware Intelligence Sharing Platform, where we're heavily involved in the development, but also part of the integration building process with the CERT community in Luxembourg. And the first ready process aligned to the patterns is what you see is that we leverage this integration and our integrations to first consume and aggregate threat intelligence. And I think the first goal for you is getting better in leveraging threat intelligence is to consume it, to identify what are the right feeds and data sources. Government agencies are pretty good in that, producing pretty valid data. But you can see this is one way of sharing information via specific standards. But you define and you see at the bottom that we also build integrations with our own technologies to build and consume threat intelligence that we produce. So what you see in McAfee ATD is basically a sandbox, a malware analytics solution. But this really doesn't matter. It could be any kind of sandbox. And think about this. Most of the time we see a sandbox as a solution that is detecting malware. This is maybe the main priority. But think about this. An intelligence platform or a sandbox produces intelligence, rich indicators of compromise that could automatically get shared and helps to validate the other intelligence sources. So for example, if the government CERT tells me this IP address is bad, and I analyze the malware in my enterprise, and that sees a command and control server connection to the same IP, this validates the intelligence that I received, and I produce very rich intelligence around that, including hashes that automatically get shared with that. So it's kind of the first step in leveraging threat intelligence. But you see also how we leverage our data exchange layer messaging fabric for that to consume the intelligence. And second, let's leverage the pre-triage steps to further investigate and look into our enterprise. So in the process of pushing intelligence into our SOC, we will automatically go back in history to identify any occurrence of any IP address connections, any hash executions within the enterprise, and will automatically inform back the threat intelligence platform. So while we do these tasks here, what you see at the top, so this part, the sticks and API integration into ESM, is basically for pre-triage and prioritization. So we automatically push intelligence, and we go back in history. But what you need to understand is, do we collect the right data and security operations today to perform these tasks? So, okay, we collect information like IP addresses and net flow data, so we can map IP addresses that we received, but what happens about hashes? So if we receive hashes, do we know who executed that file where and on which endpoint? This is information that we first need to collect and need to consider as key sensors. But at the bottom, you can see others, like our McAfee Threat Intelligence Exchange. Basically what it is, another sensor to ask, well, have you seen any executions in my enterprise, and tell me that. And the same way as you see our EDR solution at the bottom to say, let's go to every single endpoint and ask every single endpoint, do you have any indicators related to the intelligence that we received? So all these aspects that you see right and at the bottom is basically for prioritizing information. I'll give you an example. If you receive, and we have customers that receive 8 million threat indicators per day, you could put there a human and say good luck, or you create an automated process. So how do you know which are the intelligence that is most relevant to you as a business, and what should you take care most? So what happens is, this is a completely automated process to prioritize the threat intelligence that we received and automatically tell you, these are the artifacts that you should definitely investigate first. And of course, second, to update your key cyber defense countermeasures. So automatically updating various vendors with the intelligence that you received. However, we receive a converged of leveraging not an intelligence platform for that, but leveraging, for example, SIM platform or security operations tools for that to do that directly. So let's give you some ideas how customers and even government cert institutes use this kind of reference architecture today. So you see on the right-hand side that we identified or separated this in the identification, investigation, and containment phase in security operations. So now what customers do is they receive threat intelligence into their platform, and now we have a threat hunter that basically prioritizes the feeds and initiates an automated triage process, which will automatically, basically nothing else as prioritize threat intelligence. That is something we definitely need to look into. And we automatically consume that intelligence into our SOC. So our SOC gets informed that we've seen any artifacts related to this in the past, and he's performing pretty simple tasks to further look into and investigate what actually happened and scope it. Until he comes to a point to make a decision. And this is what it's all about in security operations. You have to make a decision. And what is all the data that you need to make a decision? If you come to that point, you automatically update defenses. We leverage our data exchange layer messaging fabric for that. Why? Because it's that simple. We just send a single message and update all the different key cyber defense countermeasures that I have in security operations. So let's put some value measurements around that. So if you go back to this model of time to identify, time to investigate and contain, you could see that we used 2 analysts, we used 3 consoles, and our mean time to respond was under 9 minutes. Even if it's 10 times more than 9 minutes, it's much faster than all the numbers that you see out there in the average of IT security operations. So first, you can see that we leveraged our data exchange layer fabric for pre-prioritization, and we had a pretty high average of automation of 85%. But you can see in the time to investigate, we had pretty low automation, so around 20%. So now you can see that is where we can get much better. So in that case, you will see a second use case where we do that. But also in the process automation, you can see for time to contain, pretty high average of automation. So let's look into how we can get much better by combining threat intelligence and workflow automation tools within an ecosystem. So same use case. We leverage threat intelligence feed and have an analyst that prioritizes the intelligence, even where from the location. If it's from a government cert, it's high priority for me. But now what happens? Instead of manually doing that process, we automatically collect that data with an orchestration tool called Phantom, and will automatically apply a playbook. One, validate with other threat intelligence sources. Second, leverage our own tools that I have, our SIM solutions, to collect the data and do a live hunting on every single endpoint in my enterprise. For what I do that is basically to understand or alert an analyst that he has to take an action. So what's the most interesting piece of that is, you can see now in the investigation phase, we leverage orchestration and playbook automation to take all these different actions and acquiring the right data, leveraging other intelligence sources to validate them, and give the analyst the right data that he needs to make a decision. So all this process is nothing else as giving the analyst the right data that he needs to make a decision and make it much faster than he would do it manually. Until the point he approves the containment actions and updates every single defense. In that way, you can see how we apply intelligence platforms and leverage orchestration tools basically in a combined scenario. So let's apply this to the value messaging. What you can see that we reduce the mean time to respond pretty drastically, and we are able to now maximize the time to investigate up to 100%. The most interesting aspect on this information and these figures is, and this is kind of a message to you today, is it doesn't take any technologies to start measuring your success in security operations. How many incidents per day do we have? How many analysts are working on these incidents? How many tools are involved? How many processes? All these different artifacts I could start measuring today to define if I'm successful operating IT security. And this helps you also to verify any future investment in security operation to get better in your detection and response process. Because you are not able to prevent everything. So you won't be able to do this. But it also tells you you need to have the right detection and response capabilities within the enterprise. That's the reason why security operation is getting this kind of broad topic within the enterprise today. So with that, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.